Welcome, everyone, to this meeting of the Republican Labour Education Forum. The speaker this evening is Steve Freeman, and he'll be talking about the need for a Commonwealth of England. Unfortunately, the term Commonwealth has been misappropriated, shall we say, by the establishment, by the monarchy. And so it no longer has the true meaning, which is, of course, the wealth of a country or a nation held in common by everyone in that nation. That's the true meaning, of course, and it's been very much, what's the word I want, very much adulterated and appropriated or misappropriated by the establishment. So I'm hoping that Steve's going to sort that all out for us in his talk. So I'm going to hand over to Steve Freeman.
Thank you, Carol. I don't know if I'll be able to achieve that, sorting it all out, but I'll do my best, and hopefully we'll have a good discussion, and then we'll find out what comrades think about that. I wanted to first of all make a reference to the manifesto that many comrades have seen, and we got some interesting support for the manifesto that we produced. Manifesto about the Commonwealth of England that we produced during the general election, and we circulated it around, and we got maybe 25, 30 people, including some people like Peter Tatchell, the MP for Derby, what's his name, Chris Williamson, among others, and we're still doing that. So but the questions that I think we need to address or discuss is, why do we use the term Commonwealth, and what does the term Commonwealth mean? So that's a fundamental thing to think about, and Carol's has already in a sense answered that in there. And secondly, why England? Why not the United Kingdom? Why not Britain, with or without Northern Ireland? So there are two issues that get debated around this, because it is called the Commonwealth of England. Before doing this, I want to highlight one or two features from the manifesto that we produced. First of all, if you look at the manifesto, it goes into our history, because it wants to locate the idea of the Commonwealth in English history, in the history of England. And it also speaks about the current situation, in the sense of there being a crisis of democracy, or if you like, a crisis in our political system, the system of the Crown in Parliament, which the manifesto says is broken, or is failing, or is simply not delivering. And then, of course, it goes on to identify or to define the Commonwealth in the first section as a democratic and social republic. But the particular things that we have highlighted in the rest of the document is, one is the importance of the public ownership of land, which the left doesn't by and large take up. But for us, it's a fundamental, as Republicans, it's a fundamental question of who owns the land. And we believe it's absolutely important that we have public ownership of land, public ownership of the banks. It defines citizenship, which is another very important issue. It calls for a new constitution, which we call which in manifestos called the Agreement of the People, which was the term that the Levellers used back in 1649. It then calls for a new political system, a Parliament for England, regional assemblies, 9 regional assemblies, local citizens' assemblies, workplace assemblies. And if we just thinking about Jeremy Corbyn for a minute, Jeremy Corbyn himself is talking about local assemblies in his area, in Islington, and people that are sympathetic to Corbyn, follow Corbyn, they're also talking about that. But they're not giving a national perspective to this. It's still very much a local perspective that they've got there. So obviously we're not going to go into the details of that manifesto, because I'm just going to talk more broadly about it. There is also an international context. I mean, if you think about it, in England, or in England and the rest of the UK, we have many problems which can't be solved in one country. There are many things that we cannot solve in one country. There's global warming. We can't solve that in one country. There's possibilities of nuclear war. We can't solve that in one country. Imperialist wars, you see Palestine, Ukraine, possibly something in China, Taiwan. Poverty is a world problem, cannot be solved in one country. Mass migration, people moving around the world, also is not something that can be sorted out in one country. The polarization between rich and poor, the failure of the world capitalist system, none of these things can be sorted out in one country. So does this mean, therefore, that we can do nothing? We just, as it were, throw up our hands in horror and sink into some kind of depression and get ready for World War III? And the answer is no. The answer is no. Even in one country or in one nation, there can be democratic victories. We, the people, can change the country from being one of the most reactionary countries to being a more progressive country, a better place to live, and an inspiration to the rest of the world. And when you think about it, even if you think back to the Russian Revolution, what was that really? A democratic victory in one country, which had a massive impact on the First World War, but more or less brought the First World War to an end. So democratic victories can inspire copycat, can push movements in the rest of the world, can open up the way to the world solutions and to deal with the problems of global capitalism. So I say that because I'm not talking about the world problems. I'm going to now focus on the question here in, let's say we say the UK. Okay, but the context is that we can't solve these problems in one country. So hence, the argument about a Commonwealth of England is us trying to make a contribution to developing a program for a democratic victory in England and the rest of the UK. Now, I think I would say that idea is, the idea that we put forward is radical in the true meaning of the word, in that it goes to the roots of the problem in the political system that we face, the system of the Crown in Parliament and the Constitution and the system of government, and how the Treasury, which is really the Crown, the Treasury which dominates all our politics and decides what we can afford and what we can and can't afford. And we'll see that in the next few days. But it also connects it to the question of national identity. Who are we as a nation? What kind of people are we? What might be called the national question in the UK. And so it's radical, therefore, in the sense of being a break with the three main trends of the English left, which are, number one, social monarchism, that is to say, attempting to revive the 1945 welfare state, which had been broken by Thatcher. That's what you could say was a Jeremy Corbyn's programme in the 2017 and 2019 Labour manifestos, also with Stalinism and also with Trotskyism. So in a way, this is a kind of critique of the politics of the main trends of the left in England. I would argue that it's revolutionary in a democratic sense, that it needs to win the support of the majority of people, not least the working class. And that implies at some point a new party, a new movement, a Republican Party essentially is implied by this, based on the organised working class, a bit like the Chartists had, the party that they had in the 1840s, which was an extra parliamentary party, which fought for democratic change, was based on the working class. And of course, famously between 1647 and 1649, the Levellers Party, which was the Republican Party during the English Civil War. So I wanted to go back. I wanted to just come completely, and I'll just show you a couple of pictures and just have some thoughts about this, because it's something really up to date, because it's something that happened in the last few days. I wanted to just take something contemporary to set that out. Here's a demonstration, as we all heard about this demonstration at the weekend. Here's one part of it there. And this is, and you can see straight, we'll all guess what this demonstration is about, by the way. And it's got the Crown in it. And that's the guys in the police uniforms at the bottom. So the Crown is there. But obviously this demonstration was called under the slogan, Unite the Kingdom. And unaware of that, there is a very right-wing band that's got a song. It's called What Patriots. And I just kind of accidentally discovered this What Patriots because it's a well-known band on the far right. And they had a song called Unite the Kingdom. And this was the name of the demonstration. And you can see there, look, these people have all got some idea of national identity. We can see there's a Union. Look at the flags that are there. What flags can you see there? Well, there's the Union Jack. We can see them. And there is the, let's hit it a bit wider than that and make it better. Let's do it like that. Sorry. So you can see the Union Jacks. You can see the flag of St. George. And you can also see the Israeli flag over here. So that's quite significant. This is, of course, the Tommy Robinson demonstration that took place on Saturday in London. And of course, there was a counter demonstration. And so I wanted to, let's see if I can move on to the next one. Unite the Kingdom is significant because it tells us that if we're going to counter what they're doing, we have to deal with the question of what's meant by unite. We have to answer that slogan that they're putting in uniting their forces. Why kingdom? Why unite? And so that's something that has to be sort of addressed politically. And then coming over here, I just call this anti because I wasn't quite sure what to call it. We could call it anti-racist. We could call it anti-fascist. And we can see what we've got here. We have got a few Palestinian flags. So there are flags there, but they're Palestinian flags. There's no other real flags. There's some banners, stand up to racism. There's a lot of placards, or SWP stand up to racism placards. But there's no pro anything on this demonstration. It's an anti-racist, anti-fascist demonstration. And when I was looking at some of the comments about the conflict, as it were, between these two, the thing that struck me was, the thing that's really worrying me, actually, let's put it like this, is that over the past year or so, the English fascism, let's call it English fascism, has been growing. The numbers on that demonstration, according to the Socialist Worker, were 20,000. The Unite the Kingdom demonstration, the Tommy Robinson demonstration, 20,000. Socialist Worker said there's 25,000 people here on this demonstration. But I don't know what other comrades think, but the idea that we've now got 20,000 fascists out demonstrating, of course they won't all be fascists, don't get me wrong, but obviously the moving, organising core is fascist. That's something we haven't seen, those kind of numbers. So I think to me, it's quite worrying where we are politically, that we can see there is a growth, I think, of a broader mobilisation of the far right. And I think that's what we see. And you could say that if this, and my thesis is going to be that the big battle is between the Crown and the Commonwealth. And if that's true, then the Crown is being represented on the fascist side of that equation, and the Commonwealth is being represented here, which seems a little bit odd because there's no sign of it politically. There's nothing to identify it. There's nothing Republican about it. There's nothing about a Commonwealth. There's nothing. It's an anti-demonstration. It's not really putting forward. It's not. You don't feel it's putting forward something in that sense positive. So I'm going to leave that behind and stop. Then go back to my original thing. But what I'm saying is that between the far left and the far right, there is an imbalance between the far right has got a kind of identity going there, which this far left demonstration then doesn't really have. So I think we got a problem we have to look. So I'm going to stop sharing at that point, and maybe we might come back to that in discussion. But let me go back then, if I could. But why use the term Commonwealth? And in any case, what does it mean, Commonwealth? Well, first of all, the term Commonwealth is in a sense the working out of a historical process of the class struggle. Our history since 1066 has been a struggle between the Crown and the Commonwealth. I would argue that and therefore, if we use the term Commonwealth, we are, as it were, taking the power that's rooted in our history of the struggle, 1,000 years of struggle between the Crown and the Commonwealth. Now, Tony Benn in 1992 used the term Commonwealth to describe his bill. But he rightly goes back in his arguments to 1066 and the oath made by William the Conqueror in Westminster Abbey in Christmas 1066. So if we want to trace the history of the crown, we can go back certainly to 1066 and see that. Now, what about the Commonwealth? Well, I doubt the Commonwealth, it interests me. I think the first historical identification that I can see at the moment, I'm sure there's some that I've completely missed, would be 1381, the People's Rebellion, which is known to us as the Peasants' Revolt. And it's first, you might say, it's the time when the Commonwealth of England first appears on the stage. The people coming from Essex, coming from Kent, arrive in Blackheath to confront the crown in 1381. I had a little quote, if I can just find my quote a minute, if you bear with me a second or two. Yeah, it's back here. This is the quote from John Ball, who was a popular rebel priest in 1381 during the Peasants' Uprising. And he is said to have made this, or it's reputed to, whether he actually said this or not, it's another matter. But according to chroniclers of the time, he said that to the army gathered, he urged them to be rid of the most powerful lords and lawyers and weed them out of the land, and that any they knew that they knew would in future be harmful to the Commonwealth. He says, to the Commonwealth, which he means by that the common people and their wealth, their health and their prosperity are being damaged by these lords and these lawyers. And the peasants were very hostile to certain priests, certain lawyers, certain tax inspectors, certain nobles, but they believed quite wrongly that Richard II, the young prince, the young king, Richard II of 1381, he could be their king. They thought maybe he could become the king of the Commonwealth. And so at a certain dramatic moment when they killed Wat Tyler, the young King Richard II rode over to the assembled Commonwealth on Blackheath and said to them, I shall be your king, follow me. And then he sort of rode off, and the peasant army kind of followed after him. And it was, of course, a fatal mistake, because Richard II then organized their complete and utter destruction. They were being hung, drawn, and quartered and hunted down. So it was a complete disaster, because they mistakenly thought that the king was a kind of neutral person in all this, and that he could therefore lead their Commonwealth. Of course, the same thing you could say happened in 1649, but they didn't make the same mistake in 1649. If we go ahead, in 1649, after the Civil War, in January 1649, 4th of January, England was declared to be a Commonwealth. So the House of Commons declared it to be a Commonwealth. Now, the Commonwealth of 1649, the first Commonwealth really that was established, kind of died before it was born, because the Levellers wanted that Commonwealth to be democratic. They had a democratic program, and the Diggers wanted land to be redistributed. So both the democratic and social aspects of that revolution were killed off by Cromwell by about May 1649, within months really of that Commonwealth being declared. In 1649, Gerard Winstanley, the leader of the Diggers, or the True Levellers, as he said, wrote that the laws of the true Commonwealth spring from the common preservation, which is the principle in everyone to seek the good of others as himself. So he declared that idea. The Commonwealth is about the common people and the common good and the common welfare of the people. And the true Commonwealth was being destroyed by Cromwell, as he saw it quite rightly, because Cromwell replaced the Commonwealth with the Protectorate. Eventually, they wanted to give the crown to Cromwell himself. And then, of course, in 1660, Charles II was restored. So the first Commonwealth the first Commonwealth died, and that was the end of that. And I don't think we'll find a second Commonwealth, my argument, is until 1945. I think we will find that in 1945 there was another attempt to create a Commonwealth, which we now understand as the welfare state and then NHS. And it was a result of the Second World War, and it was a result of the fact the working class were mobilized into the army and became a powerful force. And the ruling class had to make compromises, had to, as it were, buy off the working class. And the post-war constitutional settlement, which created, not a republic, of course, the monarchy was saved in 1945. They created what we've called it a social monarchy. That is a welfare state, still under the regime of the Crown in Parliament. And so I think that is the second Commonwealth. And therefore our history could be that when Thatcher came to power in 1979, she set about dismantling the second Commonwealth, or the welfare state, and replacing it by neoliberalism. And we're talking about the defeat of the miners being the key thing that enabled the Thatcher neoliberal project to really take off in a big way, having defeated the miners. And so it was in response to that Tony Benn came forward in 1992 with his Commonwealth Bill. Again, he's rooted the story in our history of the struggle between the Crown, as it were, and the Commonwealth. And so our starting point was to go to Tony Benn's reference of, in effect, recreating a new Commonwealth by having a democratic republic, democratic and social republic. So that's in a way the point for where we started from. So the struggle between the Crown and the Commonwealth has been going on all the way through, I would argue, all the way through. Now, what does the word Commonwealth mean? Well, it's not fixed, it's evolving. In one sense, you could think of the Commonwealth having its origins in the idea of a community for the common good. And in this sense, the Commonwealth, you could argue, already exists even under the Crown, that in the sense that there are multiple communities for the common good. Food banks, charities, football supporters, workplaces, trade unions are really communities for the common good. So even within our system, a Commonwealth, people are trying to struggle to get something better for the people already exists all over the place. Yeah, but of course it doesn't have political power. But in 1649, the Commonwealth came to be redefined as a political community for the common good, i.e. a republic for the common good, meaning the health, the welfare, the safety and security of the people. And that's the concept which Tony Benn has in his bill, which he launched in 1992. Now, Carol, aware of the time, I think I need to say a little bit about, so what I'm saying is there is a clear understanding of the Commonwealth of a community for the common good, becoming a political community, becoming a republic as it was in 1649, having a proper constitution, etc., etc. Now then, there's the next question to deal with, which is another one of controversy. Why England? Why are we focusing on England? And that's also needs to be addressed. So in a way, Britain as a state was really invented through the Glorious Revolution, 1688 to 1707. The Act of Union with Scotland in 1707 created the British Union, or the British nation, and through the Atlantic slave trade and the colonies, the British Empire, symbolized by the Union Jack, the butcher's apron as it was known, was created through that whole historical process. So when you go to that fascist demonstration, you see the butcher's apron, you see the Union, they're talking about the Union, and they're English. It's an English movement, but it's talking about the Union and the Union Jack. Well, of course, the British Empire ended in it really ended, I suppose, with the Irish uprising in the 1920s. Then, of course, the independence for India, then into the independence for the African countries in the 1950s, right the way up, I suppose, until what might be called the dissolution of the British Union, right up until the Civil Rights Movement in 1968, the rise of the provisional IRA and Sinn Féin. Right the way up to the Good Friday Agreement, we could trace that through. The Good Friday Agreement was really a truce in Ireland, not a solution. Now, the left in England, including Ben and Corbyn, has always been in favour of ending the union with Ireland. And indeed, Tony Benn includes that in his Commonwealth bill, ending of the union with Ireland. But what the Crown did at that time was granted devolved parliaments to Scotland and Wales in 1998. It was really the minimum they could get away with, but they left out the question of in making constitutional reform, they left out the question of England. There was no parliament for England because they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to do that. So the constitutional reform of 1997-8 was not a stable solution. On the contrary, if it brought off public opinion in Ireland, Scotland, and Wales for a short time, what it did was it began to stoke the idea that England was left out of this and that there needs to be some political change in England that has not been dealt with. And you can see the English question comes to the fore well, Cameron talked about having English laws for England, made in Parliament. And so what we begin to see in response is the rise of English nationalism. And I don't necessarily mean right-wing reactionary Anglo-British or English unionism, but more the feeling, a broader feeling, that democracy in England is failing, that England is being ignored and is being treated less well than Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. And so in the last 10 years, we have seen the Scottish referendum, 2014. Then we've seen the EU referendum, 2016. Then we've begun to see the rise of Reform, which is really an English unionist party. And we've seen the riots in England. So there's an appearance in the dissolution of the British Empire, in the dissolution of the British Union, that England is a question. There's a democratic deficit, a biggest democratic deficit in England that needs to be addressed. And the left, by and large, doesn't address that question. I'm going to stop now because I've talked probably more or less long enough, and I'd like to hear very much what other comrades have to say, and maybe we'll get into some of these arguments a bit more in the debate. So just to summarise this at this point, to say that rooting ourselves in the argument between the Crown and the Commonwealth puts our the story into a historical context. It roots us in the history of the class struggle in England for the last 1,000 years. So we can find those historical reference points to the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth means, as you said at the beginning, a society for, it means now a republic, a democratic and social republic. It came to mean that, but it means the idea that a society for the common good, for the commonwealth, for the common welfare of the people, which goes back. So we're speaking about what you might call a democratic republic, a welfare state for the common good. And that's what our manifesto says. And finally, we're seeing the rise of English nationalism, which must be addressed because of the breakdown of the British Empire, the British Union, and the rise of nationalism in Ireland, Scotland, Wales. England is a kind of democratic deficit that needs to be addressed, and we have to take it seriously. Otherwise, the only people who are going to be doing that is going to be Tommy Robinson and the far right are going to be addressing this question. And that means very dangerous, because they've got a program that says, unite the kingdom, and we have to have an answer to unite the kingdom. And I don't really see that in the politics on last Saturday of the anti-racist and anti-fascists. They're just saying no, but they're not saying what else. So I'll stop there, Carol.
Thanks very much, Steve. Yeah. please do put your hand up if you'd like to ask a question or contribute yourself to this argument. If you've disagreed with anything that Steve is saying, or if you've agreed, we'd love to hear either way. So please put your hand up. Conchita. Ah, there you go. Let me add you. Conchita.
Steve, really good talk today, just now. I really enjoyed it. I've been preparing through finding little treasure books in car book sales. And I'd like to show you this book that I found, The French Revolution by Thomas Carlyle. I found in a car book sale. And this other book is it is the first translation into English of the Chinese book, red book.
Yeah, the little red book, Mao
And this is amazing, actually. The way it's written, it's really for anybody to understand in a simple language, making a lot of sense. I was quite surprised. I didn't imagine that this would be so readable. So I was quite surprised. And I was quite excited getting hold of these two books in car book sales, because to me they represented very important books. This one being an Englishman's reaction to the French Revolution when it actually more or less happened. He wrote the book regarding the historical events. And I've read more than half of it. It's not an easy book to read, but it does give you the horror of what went on. I assume when I was reading it, I wasn't sure if he's expressing this horror to make us feel extra horrified, or whether the horror that he describes was really like that, but certainly was horrific. I didn't know that there was a connection with the Vatican during the French Revolution, in that the Swiss Guard played a big part. The Swiss Guard, in a sense, being the protectors of the royal family in France. They were the guards that they had. And the troop of the Swiss Guards, one of the incidents described, they got totally slaughtered. So those were the first shocks, quite horrifically killed. And then it was describing how the people's courts were managing the trials. And basically, you just got taken into a hall, a particular hall. Your sentence would be yes or no, guilty or not guilty. You'd be pushed out of a little side door in this hall, and you ended up being thrown in a pit that killed you because you were thrown on top of lances and swords that were like spikes on the floor. So at the end of the day, after all the people that were found guilty were thrown into this pit, it was very bloody in this courtyard. And I mean, the horror of it all. And it was very much, there were seldom people there that would be respected enough by the people running the revolution that could moderate the fever for blood, the thirst for blood that seemed to exist. And that's what seemed to be the greatest horror for the people writing about the French Revolution then. but the Swiss guards had to be sent to France they had to have permission from the Pope, because they couldn't be sent out and leave the king unguarded in a way. They had to protect the king. And I've always known that in France, the royal family was very much connected to the Pope and the Vatican, because basically I feel it was through a Roman French sort of king, Constantine the Great, that Italy seems to have been conquered towards the end of the Roman Empire, and that was at itself the beginning of the Catholic Church being made a legal or on an equal footing to all the pagan religions that existed. So it was Constantine the Great that allowed for the Roman Empire to accept Christianity as a legal religious expression. And he allowed it also because he rebuilt a section in Rome near the exit, near the walls of Rome, near the exits, two particular gates exiting Rome. He built his first temple, which ended up being the home, or it was given as the home of the first pope. And this temple was built on I think it was the Fausta family. Sorry, yeah, I'm going on a bit.
Yeah, this is extremely interesting, but what is your contribution to what we're talking
Okay,
about?
my contribution
The
was
Commonwealth of England. How does
the
this
Commonwealth
relate?
of England compared to these two. This would have been this would have come before, and this would have destroyed or really scared the monarchy in Britain. And we know that the German aristocracy, the French aristocracy, took asylum in Britain at the time Thomas Carlyle wrote this description. So it did, from reading this, you get the picture of the horror of the revolution. It was also, in a sense, a failure in France. It got, I think it was the German kings as well as the Pope got together, and they defeated and brought back the monarchy in France eventually. But Britain was a safe country, which I suppose it was the safety of all the aristocracy that was able to come to Britain in asylum that must have given us room for discussion here in England about Commonwealth, about how the working class may have wanted to be ruled. I don't know. I haven't put the bits together yet in that sense, but I thought, okay, if we're going to read about how we want, whether we want a monarchy, whether we want it to continue, whether we want a republic, well, there's the French Republic, and also there's the Chinese effort at making a new nation for themselves, independent. And the way, if you're going to have a peasants' democratic and free republic, the language needs to be geared towards the peasants. No, if you're going to leave out the lords, the lawyers, the upper middle class, and the aristocracy, the language, in a sense, to me, seems important to reflect that democracy in the language. And that's the point I wanted to make. the
Yeah.
language and that. And then for that reason, these considerations I wanted to point out for Steve, and it's worth getting to read these books again, just to draw you near to how other countries dealt with that problem, especially our neighbours, the French.
Well, of course, the French Revolution happened after the English Civil War and Revolution.
Yes.
That was a later occurrence.
Yes.
We were actually the first to want a republic and a Commonwealth. I'm going to go to Tim now. Steve, do you want to come back to that now, or would you like me to take more people?
Take more people, I think.
Okay, so I'm going to bring Tim in now.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Very well.
Yeah, okay. I just while you were still speaking, Steve, you were talking about Tony Benn and his bill in the early 1990s. Well, I looked it up in Wikipedia, and in fact, his bill was not about the Commonwealth of England. It was about the Commonwealth of Britain, and he presented it first in 1991, and then repeatedly until 2001. Right. Yeah. So right, the Wikipedia article details in some sets out in some detail what his bill consisted of, and it seems to coincide very much with what you have proposed in the past. But he is talking about the Commonwealth of Britain, specifically of England, Scotland, and Wales, and not a Commonwealth of England. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tim. I'm going to bring in Mike now.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. That was excellent. And thanks also, Conchita, for raising some really kind of interesting points there. I would observe about Thomas Carlyle that he was quite a well-known conservative. So he would say that, wouldn't he? But you're right, it does reflect a very conservative trend in relation to the French Revolution at the time. I mean, Carlyle was actually born around about the time of the French Revolution, so it's not that he remembered it. But he, as a sort of an early and mid-Victorian commentator, was very much, part of the social cement. And, there was a continual contrast. It was through the Napoleonic Wars and subsequently steady Britain, meaning steady England, with its wonderful empire, as opposed to, these hotheads in France and in other places. Johnny Foreigner, of course, never does it as well as the Brits. So this sense of exceptionalism, which, we've seen brought way up to date. And of course, at the heart of it is this conservative sense of Englishness. In the 1790s, there was real fear amongst the English and British ruling class. George III and Pitt the Younger and all the rest were terrified. And they created mobs called Church and King mobs around the country. They got a load of, it was a bit like they found a load of local Tommy Robinsons, or sorry, Stephen Yaxley Lennons, to whip up some local boyos and get them full of alcohol, and then roaring around and destroying the churches of dissenters, and certainly chasing after anybody who had the slightest bit progressive views. And that led into the Napoleonic Wars and helped ensure that a lot of people were allowed themselves to be conscripted. And, the call afterwards, after the end of the war, for some rights for the working man was met by, well, it was the Duke of Wellington, in fact, and his associates, who presided over Peterloo, which was, I think, in 1819, so not long after the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. So, you know, that was the answer that British ruling class gave to you know, rights for workers, rights for ordinary people of any sort, democratic rights. Well, you know, let's just suppress them. But at its heart was this English exceptionalism. And the question, the other thing I just wanted to say, why England? Well, you know, you can start from a very basic premise. Well, that's where we are. You know, we are not in Scotland, not in Wales, not in Ireland. And as we know, yeah, a certain previous revolutionary was very clear, the main enemy is at home. And it is the British state is actually, you know, has at its heart England and the English aristocracy and the English bourgeoisie, who made a pact really to ensure stability, social stability, after having scared themselves silly through cutting the head off a king. You know, they made this pact to ensure stability across generations. And the Hanoverians, you know, ironically, as English as any Hanoverian could be, were very much a social cement in all of this. So, you know, on the one hand, it's where we are. On the other hand, I think if, you know, for comrades who are in Scotland, who are in Wales, there are issues of you know, Scots nationalism, even Welsh nationalism, you know, Plaid Cymru and some of its, you know, more radical sort of Welsh Republican wings have a great deal to offer, let alone, of course, Ireland. And, you know, Britain's first colony, Britain's last colony with partition. And we saw the, you know, the mayhem within the lifetimes of most of us that occurred there. And really the only position had to be for progressives of any kind, and certainly for us as English Republicans, is that Ireland needs to be free to decide its own future. And it's pretty clear that they're likely to do that pretty soon. And interestingly, the wedge driven between Protestants, you know, by the creation of loyalism, and nationalists, the Catholics, is sort of breaking down to the extent that only the die-hard loyalists are likely to remain wanting to stay in Britain. There is almost certainly even now a majority, including younger and more pragmatic Protestants, who would vote for a united Ireland. Because apart from anything else, Brexit has shown them that life is considerably better south of the border. So it's a combination of pragmatic reasons and to some extent principled reasons. You know, what's happened south of the border has been a lot more socially progressive, not only than what's happened in the north of Ireland, but also what's happened in the rest of the UK and in England. So England is at the heart of this. We can't ignore it. And we have to confront, you know, the as Steve says, the you know, quite coherent and orchestrated attempts to sort of create a new nationalism for the 21st century. Interestingly, there, of course, they have managed to take in not just the usual symbols, but as we saw from that photo, there was the Israeli flag, the Star of David. Now, that's something relatively new. That despite very deep roots in anti-Semitism, they can allow themselves to support Zionists, because Zionists are killing Muslims, Palestinians. And there's also an argument about, you know, Mr. Yaxley Lennon's origins being as much with friends who worked for the Israeli Defense Forces as they are in traditional sort of, English patriotic far-right fascism. But, that's for another day. But it's really interesting, that development. And we must sort of stay ahead of the game on that.
I'm going to bring Peter in now. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. Yeah, all very, very interesting. As usual, good introduction from Steve. What I'd like to do is to actually ask Steve what the difference, or he envisages the difference between the Commonwealth Party and the traditional Marxist Socialist Revolutionary Party, not in existence at the moment, but that we all call a Communist Party. And is there a difference? Are we speaking about the same animal, or is the argument to sort of pull away from the traditional Marxism and Communist Party type organisation? The other thing is, I'd just like to mention that you can't have socialism in one country. It's been tried. A guy called Joseph Stalin was quite keen on the idea. But the traditional Marxist view is that that's an impossibility, and it's a matter of revolutionary movements actually feeding off each other and building a working class that's capable of actually ruling the world. So I'd just throw them things into the hat, if you like. Thanks, comrades.
Yeah, Peter, some very good questions indeed. I don't see any other hands up at the moment, so I'm going to go back to Steve to answer those questions and talk about those contributions. Steve.
Okay, Commonwealth Party and Communist Party, they are two different things. But going back to my starting point, Peter, was that a Communist Party to me has to be an international party, because what it's setting out to do is to change the world, to get rid of capitalism on a global scale. So in a sense, a national Communist Party is a contradiction in terms for me. So if I wanted to form a Communist Party, I wouldn't think, I'm going to form a British Communist Party. I would say that how can we get together with people in other countries to form a party that was who wanted to end capitalism on a global scale. So there is a need for a Communist Party if you think there's a need to get rid of capitalism on a global scale, which I do. But then the question of what happens in a particular country where the mass of people are not, the mass of the working class are not communists. They're kind of social democrats in a way. They want to fight and struggle and change the system that they're living in. And as you say, well, we can't have socialism in one country. That's not the answer to that. But in a way, the Commonwealth is saying that that is not socialism in one country, because we're not calling it socialism. But it's something built on our own history and tradition of class struggle, of the idea that we can create a democratic and social republic in one country. It won't solve the world's problems, because you need a world party to be able to do that. Nevertheless, it would be a huge step forward for the working class to do that. And that the role of communists should be as part of that Commonwealth Party, part of that social democratic movement, rather than setting themselves up as a national alternative to it. So the Commonwealth is not socialism in one country. It's not claiming to be socialism in one country. It doesn't say it's socialism in one country. But what it's saying is what we need is a democratic and social republic, i.e. a thoroughly democratic republic that addresses the social conditions of the working class, including health, welfare, education, work, all these other things that, the left, the social democratic leftist tends to take up as well. So I suppose in a way it's a reformulation the kind of social democracy that we've had in England, which has been social monarchism of the Jeremy Corbyn type, and it's an argument that that version of social democracy is now dead. It needs to be revived in a different way as something more thoroughly democratic and social republic. Obviously, I don't know if that'll answer you, Peter. Maybe we'll come back and say if it does. Tim's point, I think I'm going to go back. To Conchita, first of all. Well, I think that Carol was right to say that the English Republic and the English Revolution of the 1640s was a huge, on a global scale, was a huge impact, not only on this country, but on the world. And it was a defeated revolution, but where did it go? Well, the English Revolution turned up again in America, and it was called the American Revolution. So the English Republic, it was, it went to America, and it also went to France. The big connection between those, of course, is the work of Tom Paine, who was an Englishman who went to America to formulate the politics in America, and he also turned up, and I think he was elected actually in the French Assembly. And it's true what Mike said. Thomas Carlyle was a conservative. The idea of revolution, he hated it. Blood, terror, torture, that's all revolution was. We didn't want any revolutions. So I think that was his attitude. But he forgets that what the French Revolution did is it put the ideas of liberty and equality and humanity, actually, at the heart of modern culture. So I think the French Revolution has given us a lot of very positive things, even though it didn't achieve liberation, as it were, for the French people. That's why the French people are, to this day, more political in their attitude to things than probably we are in England. So I think it's done that. As for Mao Zedong, I think I read his little red book back in about 1972, and I've forgotten what's in it. But I did read it a long time ago, and probably in those days, I probably thought it was quite good. I don't know if I'd say the same today. But in a way, Mao Zedong was and the Communist Party was really a Republican Party in a way of the Chinese people. It created the People's Republic of China. The problem was that, again, they ended up without democracy in China, like we've all ended up. The English Revolution didn't bring us democracy. The French Revolution didn't end with that, and neither did that. And ultimately, neither did the Russian Revolution. So the lessons of those revolutions is that without democracy, they can't really be. They cannot end up liberating people and empowering people or giving people power if they don't have democracy in their heart and soul, I suppose you might say. Now, Tim's point, Tim's absolutely right, and I certainly would never have said anything other. Tony Benn argued for a Commonwealth of Britain, not a Commonwealth of England. But what he included in there, but he didn't include Northern Ireland. So he definitely wanted to get rid of Northern Ireland. And he argued for a federal republic of England, Scotland, and Wales. But in his bill, as you said quite rightly, he said that Wales should have a parliament, Scotland should have a parliament, and England should have a parliament. And if they had parliaments, then you could create a federal republic out of these three nations united in that way. Now, I'm actually a believer in a federal republic. I've always believed in a federal republic of England, Scotland, and Wales. However, and this is the difference, I believe the only way you could possibly get to that is if England, Scotland, Wales have their self-determination, win their sovereignty, and decide for themselves as people, do they want to be in a federal republic? Rather than England imposing something on Wales and Scotland, that to me is completely the wrong way. An independent Scotland, independent Wales, independent England could voluntarily decide to come together and form a federal republic, where each nation, a free association, or an association of free nations. So I agree with the aim. Ultimately, it would be good to have a federal republic. In fact, it may be that we end up in a federal republic of Europe rather than a federal republic of England, Scotland, and Wales. I don't know how it will pan out in the future. So we are in favour of the closest possible unity between the English and the Welsh and the Scottish people, and the Irish people for that matter. But Mark said in the case of Ireland. Ireland should become independent, and then maybe we can have a federation with Ireland. And I'm saying the same thing. Scotland and Wales should be independent from England, and then maybe we can have a federation with them, voluntarily entered into. Now, and I mean, one other point. The fact is that since Ben wrote his bill in 1992, we had 1998 in which Tony Blair set up a Scottish Parliament and a Welsh Parliament. And then what we've seen from that is we've had the Scottish referendum in 2014. We've had the Brexit result where Scotland voted to remain in the European Union, as indeed did Northern Ireland, and yet they were forced out of the European Union against their democratic decisions. So I think what's happening is we're having the breakup of Britain, we're having the slow evolution of England, Scotland, and Wales. And the right way to go in that is not to cling on to Scotland and Wales, but to say to Scotland and Wales, you are free countries, and if we have anything to do with it, you can be independent. And then why not then come together after that, if you want, voluntarily into a federal relationship? The English, if we call it this, the English question, because people realize, well, there's a Welsh question, the Scottish question. The English question has always got two bits. One is, what is the constitution that England's going to have? And we have to address that. What kind of state, what kind of constitution should England have? And the second part of it, and they go together, is what is the identity? What is the, as it were, the national identity of England, of the people living in England? We've got strong regional identities in England. We've got, Liverpudlians, Mancunians, Brummies, East Anglians, Geordies, Cockneys, etc. We have a strong regional identity, but have we got something to bind us together as a country? Now, England historically has the identity of being an Anglo-Saxon, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant nation. That's what the fascists are playing on. They want to keep that idea going. But what we have to do is we can't ignore that. We have got to say that England needs to be redefined as a multi-faith, multiracial nation, no longer a white nation, but the kind of nation it already is. We need to have a different identity for England, and that ties in with a different idea of an English democratic republic. So I think if we leave the question of English identity to the far right, then we're playing a very, very dangerous, stupid, in ways, game. We have to take part in the struggle to redefine what it is to be English. And in fact, in the manifesto we put forward, we did actually address that, because we have a little bit which says in citizenship, every citizen has all the rights defined in the Constitution, associated responsibilities, for example, paying taxes, voting in elections, holding office, and service for the community. Citizenship is not defined by ethnicity, but belongs equally to all settled in England by birth or residence. In other words, everybody settled here should consider themselves to be English. It's not a racial definition. It's a definition of citizenship that's open to anybody. Black, white, green, purple, whatever color it is. We have to get that idea that is what England is. It is the nation that it is. It's not the nation that the far right want to define it as being a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant nation. We have to contest that definition, and it's tied up with contesting the Constitution and the system of government that we've got. All these things tie up together. And finally, I think I've answered Peter. Did I answer Peter's? I think I did. I wanted to say that the effect of 1998 and Tony Blair's reforms is that's made the democratic deficit in England deeper than elsewhere. So if you look at things like social care, you'll find that the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly have made provisions for the Welsh and Scottish people that don't exist in England. If you take education, if you take grants, I think it is, for students, those parliaments have been able to be more progressive than it is in England. Social care in England is worse. And that's because the influence, England doesn't have a way of influencing the laws that we have. And the English working class has no way of doing that. So I think the democratic deficit is not just a term, it actually means that things are worse in England, despite having the biggest working class, and therefore the most progressive force possibly. It isn't translated in the political system into social reform, democratic reform, because the system rules us out of doing that, really.
Thank you very much, Steve. I think you've answered all those questions extremely well. I think, you know, the fact that at the moment Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland don't have any autonomy at all. Scotland might want another referendum, but they're not going to get one because the establishment in England is actually worried that they might actually vote for independence this time, which they didn't think they were going to the first time. So I think the idea of a federation of equal partners is very, very important. You've got to break this, if you like, abusive marriage where England tells Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland what to do. I've got to break that bond and have an equal
reconstitute it.
Absolutely. It's a question of getting an equal federation where the partners are have equal say. And I think that's really, really important point to get across. Well, I don't see any other hands up now. So...
If any of those comrades wanted to come back at all, Carol, I don't know if we got any. If they want to come back for I don't know if I've clarified their points at all, or I've tried to do that. But if they want to come back again,
I think you did. I think you'd answered every question or contribution that was put forward. But if anyone would like, as Steve said, if anyone would like to come back and challenge what Steve has said this time round, you're very, very welcome. So would anyone like to come?
I'm quite happy with what Steve said in answer to me. So I can only speak for myself, of course.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Steve. Yes.
Same with me. I'm happy with how Steve answered. It put my mind into better direction as well with the stuff that I've read. Thank you, Steve.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm of the same opinion as well. Quite happy with Steve's response. Thanks.
Well, you've done well then, Steve.
I've done very, very well. I'm hoping Mike's agreed as well. We've got a full set.
Yeah. Well, as am I, Steve. As am I. I'm completely happy, really.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot more that can be said.
Of course there is. Yeah, of course there is, and it's only a short thing.
We have an hour and a half maximum meeting,
yeah,
so
yeah, sure. I would, if you haven't read it. I mean, just to say that, obviously, have a look at the manifesto again if you haven't read it recently. I did send it around, and we want to try and get more support for that. And obviously, that in my own thing, if I could do this as to finish off, Carol, maybe just to say that where we're positioning ourselves is we want to put on so the Corbyn movement, the movement led by Jeremy Corbyn that gathered so much support and did so well, actually, when you consider what happened in 2017, before it was actually defeated and crushed. That movement was a huge step forward in many ways, and yet it's now left us in, I don't know where, that movement, the Corbyn movement, is still floundering around at the moment, trying to find out what direction to go in. And what we're saying is, this is the direction to go in. We're saying to the Corbyn movement, go back to Tony Benn rather than Jeremy Corbyn. Take seriously what Tony Benn told all of us to think about in his bill and his series of bills, in his efforts. Take that seriously. All we've done is take what Tony Benn's done and we've amended it, reformed it, I think upgraded it for the fact that England is a big question now, and it wasn't when Tony Benn was writing. So we want to put this forward for the broad, if you like, the social democratic left. And the communists that Peter speaks about, the communists, I think, should be backing this, as well as trying to build an international party that they see for as a world thing. I see another hand coming up.
Yeah, Jennifer's just put a hand.
I wanted to say, how far do you think we're going to get while Labour remains in the title of the group?
I don't think personally, I don't think that's the I don't think that's the problem, because the word, I think that what we started out originally saying is that there is a tradition of Republican Labour in the Labour Party, and that tradition goes back to Keir Hardie, who was a Republican. It goes through to Lansbury, George Lansbury. Thank you, Mike. Keir Hardie, George Lansbury. It then goes on to, I think, possibly Michael Foot, but I'm not sure. But certainly it goes on to Tony Benn. That is a Republican tradition within the Labour Party. You can see it even if you go back to 1923, when 300,000 people voted to abolish the monarchy in the Labour Party. It was just that 6 million or 5 million voted to keep the monarchy. That was all the Union Bloc vote in 1922, I think, Labour Party conference. So we're rooting ourselves in saying that we are in that tradition coming from the left of the Labour Party. But what we're doing is we are taking the Tony Benn tradition and we're shaping that. Now, whatever this party will be called, we don't know. But Republican Labour simply, to me, means a Republican alternative to Keir Starmer's loyalist, unionist Labour Party. That's what it means. It stands, for me, as an alternative, and it says to the labour and trade union movement, there is an alternative direction that you can go in. We don't say you must leave the Labour Party. It just simply says that there is an alternative direction. So personally, I mean, this would be something we have to debate, I guess, a bit more. But I think it's premature yet to simply say that's what we should change our name. We're trying to root ourselves in that tradition of the left wing of the Labour Party, and saying it's about time you took that seriously, the Republican bit. I saw, by the way, that listening to James O'Brien said, the thing about England is we've got something called lazy republicanism. Lazy republicanism. He says that a hell of a lot of people, a large number of people in England are Republican, but they simply can't be bothered to do anything about it. He says that's lazy republicanism. And I think that's true of the left. But anyway, that's not what you asked me, Jennifer, but I just thought I'd throw it in.
I just think it's so toxic at the moment as a brand. People won't understand the history. That's all. Just make that point.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Right, I don't see any other hands up. So, Mike. Mike wants to come back in.
Just very briefly on what Jennifer raised and what you just said, Jennifer. I mean, I think Starmer's Labour is quite unique insofar as it's sort of gone further and downhill and hit a nadir. I think that's the word that's used, which is almost a point of no return for the Labour Party, because internal debate democracy is completely stifled, and you cannot even call them a party of the centre left. You can hardly even call them a party of the centre. At the moment, what do we got? We got austerity part 2, which is apparently not austerity, but has all the signs and hallmarks of it. We have calls for deregulation, and the further free ports. That this was a project of the Tory right. This came out of Boris Johnson and his pals. Let the market rip. And that's what they're also with regard to house building. It's rip up all the rules. So it's an area of special scientific interest. Who gives a monkeys? Let's build lots of houses on it anyway. And because there's deregulation, there will be no pressure on developers to have, in reality, any more affordable or social housing units than there have been before, because there's no sign that they're going to have their get out clause, their viability clause, being rescinded. So in all respects, Labour is finding itself completely isolated. The fact that, there's just shockwaves of horror And, not just amongst Labour supporters, but anybody who thought, well, Labour's in, they're going to be a bit kinder to pensioners, aren't they? They're going to, poor pensioners, they're going to be a bit, they're going to get rid of the two-child benefit cap, etc., etc. Well, no, they're not. And Starmer seems proud of that fact. That it's almost as though there's a wrecking mission that's going on. So, I think the opportunity for us to kind of look at a different direction. There are many people on the left who are talking about an alternative to Labour. The trouble is, most of the ideas are the same old ideas again and again. And I think that there are real opportunities for us in this, precisely because of the predicament that Starmer's Labour has put everybody in.
If I could just add to Jennifer, I think Jennifer's raised a very important point, and I think we need to give a better answer than possibly I've just given to Jennifer. But I think there is, to me, it's about holding your nerve at the moment to see how it's going to evolve, because the trade union movement is still tied to Labour, and that's who we have to be, strictly speaking, addressing. So I think Jennifer I'm glad you raised that point, and it is a very good point, and other people will come up with it as well, and we have to have a better, more effective answer maybe than what I've given. I don't know, but I think it goes back to the trade union movement and the part of the Labour Party, including people like Corbyn, who see themselves as part of the Labour Party, not in the strictest sense of being members of it, because I've never been a member of the Labour Party, as it happens, but as a part of a historical tradition of republicanism against the loyalist, which is the mainstream Labour Party, loyalist, unionist Labour Party.
I've got Pete. Pete, I'm bringing you in again.
Yeah, just on this Labour label, we don't need to forget that the Labour movement doesn't mean the Labour Party.
Yes, exactly.
You can be Labour without being in the Labour Party. And the other point I want to make is there's been no mention tonight about Palestine and what's happening in Palestine, because the Starmer and his people have made it quite clear that they back the Zionists in Israel to the hilt. It doesn't matter what they do, what breach of international law takes place. They will continue to defend them, and I think that is becoming completely untenable, because how can you be in a party, giving a support to a party in elections, etc., when they're standing on the bodies of the Palestinians, and the fact that that Starmer and company could well, hopefully, in one point in history, actually be standing in a dock in Nuremberg to answer for the crimes of what the Israelis have done, and for me, it's becoming increasingly untenable to actually be part of that, because I think anyone with any conscience, never mind a socialist conscience, can't support what's actually going on in Gaza and Lebanon and Iran and everywhere else, because the Israelis seem to think they can go and attack everybody. There's no limit on what they can carry out, and the statements that come out of the military, the Israeli military, are quite appalling statements, and the films that the IDF soldiers have actually filmed themselves doing. It's the first time in history where army, quite a large number of army personnel have actually been filming themselves carrying out war crimes. Even the SS had the had the decency to hide the or attempt to hide the crimes that they were committing by making out that these camps were work camps, nothing nothing to do with extermination. But what's happening in Palestine is horrendous, and I think, quite frankly, that it's untenable to support Labour in any way whatsoever at the moment until such times as the Labour Party actually kicks Starmer and his company out, and they end up being prosecuted, because that's what they want to happen to them. They want to be in clink. Anyway,
thank you. Can I just comment?
Oh, Peter, yes. And if we had a republic, perhaps we wouldn't be supporting Israel. And in fact, I think we definitely wouldn't be supporting Israel, because we would have true democracy. And we know that, upwards of 70% of the people in this country do not support Israel and the genocide it's committing against Gaza. So I think if we had a republic, then it would be a different story. And thanks very much for that, Peter. Sorry, Steve, I jumped in there.
No, that's fine. I saw a comment from, I think, Maria in the chat, and I can't really answer that comment as such, but Peter Tatchell supporting our project doesn't mean we're supporting things he said about Israel or Palestine. I don't know particularly what his position is in detail, but we're not supporting him. He's a long-standing Republican, a long-standing believer in civil rights and civil liberties. So he gave his endorsement to our manifesto, which is a good thing. But it doesn't mean we support his particular view on Palestine. And from what you appear to have said, and I don't know about his position in detail, Maria, then we wouldn't be doing that. Our thesis is this, really, that we're living through a crisis of democracy in this country, and you might imagine that crisis of democracy is brought to a head by what's happened in Palestine. So I want to say, where's the Republican movement? If we've got a crisis of democracy and we think there should be a Republican movement appearing at this moment in time, well, where is it? When I showed you that picture of the anti-fascist, anti-racist, there was no sign of any republicanism there. Nothing that would suggest that. But what I would argue is that the Palestinian movement in this country is really a kind of civic republicanism, where citizens come out regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, or any of these things. They come out in defense of the rights, the democratic rights of self-determination for the Palestinian people. And we're united on that. Whatever differences or different opinions we have on that, it's a mass movement of people who are saying we oppose the policy of the British Crown, which is supplying arms and supporting Israel. So in a way, the Palestinian movement on our streets is a kind of Republican movement, even though it is not consciously making Republican noises. It is the people coming out in defense of freedom and democracy onto our streets. And that is a huge difference from what existed before. Where was the Republican movement before that? You'd probably have to go back to 1870 to find one. And there was one back then. So I think this is what's happening there, and the mobilization of many citizens, thousands of citizens, is about a recognition of the need for a democratic and republican approach to Palestine and other questions. The thing is that what we have to try to do is, we can't do that, we don't have the forces to be able to do that, is to say to this movement, why not say, not just Crown, not just ask the policy, not just ask the Crown to have a different policy towards Israel, but to say we're not satisfied with the Crown as such, that we want a different democracy now. That's the lesson of Palestine. We must have a different democracy in this country than the one that backs Israel. So I think it does raise fundamental democratic questions. And therefore it's hugely significant, by the way, which is why when we did our manifesto, we actually had a section saying General election 2024, democracy in Palestine. We linked our manifesto to the Palestinian question in 2024, quite rightly.
Thank you very much, Steve. Right, well, we have gone over our 90 minutes now, so I think it's time to draw the meeting to a close. I just want to say thank you very much, Steve. Your talk has generated an extremely interesting discussion, and I want to thank everyone who's contributed to the meeting. There have been some great contributions, some very important questions, which I think Steve has gone a long way to answering. So thank you very much, Steve, and thank you very much for everybody else for attending.
Comrades.
And enjoy the rest of your evening.